So you won't look at it. You, like all of us, serve some sort of disparate notion that here we are going into late October. My, the year's gone by quickly, hasn't it? This is the season of the witch. This is the season of the high witchcraft holidays. The Sabbat, I believe. And is it a little ironic that AI3 Atlas would be coming closest approximately to the sun at the end, the 29th of this month, a junction point? And how does this all correlate in with Trump being deemed by the high witch satanic, let's be honest? But when we look at Satana, that is Jason Reza Giorgiani's interpretation of this, and then for him to further say, well, yeah, by all respects, I'm a Satanist. I mean, he said this many times in interviews. Now, to say that I am working antithetical, juxtaposed, or simply that I'm working as the adversary, right? That's a completely different contrivance than outwardly displaying and saying for him to say, I am a Satanist. See, to say that you're a Satanist means that you're being a practicing Satanist. So what does this mean? It means that the less you know, the better off you are. In fact, it's so militarized when you look at Michael Aquino and the maneuvers that he was doing, and good observations by J.J. Vance with Operation GCD to formalize from his military background and go, there's no way that this high-ranking military official who's linked in with the monarch daycare centers and all these other terrible travesties of this underground cave system that these Satanists like to pull these children into when they do these ritualistic abuses. As to say, there's no way he could have ever passed any of these rigorous physical exams, right? And how does this tie into people like Johnny Depp, Hunter S. Thompson, who's celebrated, right, as this amazing figure? And then we get into the Mormons that Heidi Love gets so deeply into with the Unfiltered Rise, right? We get into a lot of the things that Tim from Sixth Sensory podcast gets into when we're talking about mounds. We're talking about specific locations and how long this has really been going on. We're talking about the artifices of human sacrifice, right? That for the long, as a sort of militaristic operation in maneuver in plan, was to say that to the farmers, and the very farmer's almanac, I would argue, that this is a cyclical and systemized approach to whether or not you're going to eat. Now it's, you're eating all this fabricated food, the plan's working out marvelously, whether you feel like you are inducted into as a servant, right? You are, in fact, the higher up you go in ranking and the more affirmative you get by saying, oh, I am a practitioner and this is how you move ahead. And then you begin to see the people and the same principal elements, or really anti-principal elements that they follow, and they make it real easy for you. Look, you have these 5 points. The first thing you have to do in all of these situations is sacrifice purity. And the explicit nature of this, the ontology, the Wicca, the Luciferian aspect to nature, being and becoming. I just posted something up to the effect where I'm looking at Martin Heidegger and what Dasein really means. I'm looking at the ontology behind people that seem to be creating this construct for a sociology, right? That you hear Noam Chomsky go on about, and then you see how this person might be on a list, right? This person might be complicit or implicit in a specific 1001 Club type maneuver. And you begin to see how Plutchik's wheel, the emotional breakdown, which I would venture to say that Maslow's hierarchy of needs complements this quite well, is that once you break it down and you really look at it, you go, no, the reason Maslow came out with transcendence later on was an admittance of this fact that you leave out one primary principle, and that is to produce the healthy ego. Don't you understand that when you think the difference between, well, like this whole thing that's going around about 6-7, right, with South Park, right? But when you get down into it, what I was breaking down is 6-7 is extremely relevant, and the fact that people are beginning to notice this, because when you get down into the count of 6-7, you are taking into placings as well with the phi or phi resonance or the golden mean Fibonacci, where you begin to pan it out. You go, look, pan it out. Think about that. Like pan. Go look at Bacchus. Go look at the studies with Neil from Gnostic Informant, and his ties in with Amon Hillman. I'm not calling him a Satanist. In fact, I think he's gone the other way, where he's gone, wait, what am I doing? What direction am I going in? I'm just trying to study these arcane esoteric concepts and ideas, and I'm really taking it seriously. And suddenly, I'm being like boxed into this maneuver that I either have to proclaim myself as a Satanist, right? The adversary, heavily being correlated and associated with people like Jason Reza Giorgiani, or even more so Amon Hillman, and to start to make these statements of, if you are printing out information abroad and people are in collective, like Johnny Depp letting off those 3 satanic murderers, right, that murdered 3 young children, went about eating their flesh, eating the testicles, right? And this was like the first deposition information, then it got diluted, and then the kid was actually, you'll see this in interviews, go back and look, I actually posted something up from last messages. You'll see this stuff just disappear. I mean, it literally just disappears, because this power of contrivance, right, of capitulation, to see, oh, this is how it works, this is what I want, so this is what I'm going to do, right? What was it called? Cold Soul, that I watched the other night, last night. It's this funny observation of what would happen if a New Yorker was able to go in and trade their soul out, or have their soul stored, or go soulless for a little while. If we were to really look at that in sort of a comedic sense, what does that look like? So I'll put up a link for that specific movie. This goes back, I think it was like 2009. But the whole point of bringing that up is to say, through this ontology, is that these people want what they want. They want their cake and eat it too. What I alluded to before is extremely important, where you have this 0, right, which is really monad, so it's the all-encompassing. But you get into John Dee's hieroglyphic monad, but you look at it, it goes 0, 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, right? So where are we? So we're at the 6-7 mark, 5, 8. That's 6-7. So when you're talking about the 6th and 7th place, and then some would say, no, you don't conclude phi or phi Fibonacci formulation from that. You start out with 1. Like, you don't go 0, 1, 1. Well, if 0 doesn't count, then it's nothing, right? If 0 doesn't exist, then the binary sequence, the non-Euclidean spherical mathematics that all these computer systems run off of, has no relevance. Of course 0 has a relevance. In fact, if it works as a vacuum and it draws in information, as they like to say, then you have something that actually consumes information, and you have the output of a 1 that brings the information out. But do you really ever have a 0 that sits in a neutral place? That's the thing that we have to get into, is if you are living, this is the Satanist statement right here, and this is what I believe that they truly believe. right? Down to the essence of why they do things and who they are. They begin to look at the world in a rationalistic way, and they begin to see that those who want to see themselves as good can never really be good. They can never, there's no provability to goodness. In fact, you break down the term and it's really godness, right? And when you get into God, there's no proof of this in the sense of a benevolent or this auspicious, omniscient God that sort of, this emulation that God is an all, not an all-consuming Old Testament God, right? Not a highly despotic, racist God, but is in fact just this sort of, should we say Zoroastrian, Ahura Mazda sort of, really the Allegra, sacred or mystic mushroom type of God, right? So when you begin to break this down and you see that, okay, what do we come from? Is there a denial based on the sexualization and even more the drunken sexual exploits that you came to this planet most likely, or into this existence or reality physically from, right? Because we know that the population is out of control. We know that what births most of these people, which is heavily inebriated, short-sighted, wanton desire that manifests a child. And we know that most of the time these pregnancies are not planned, and that most people want to act like the pregnancies were planned. They want to act like they're in control of something and to do with this, when in fact the only time that they could say that is when they are operationally going about looking at these witchcraft high holidays, or if you want to go toward witch light and call yourselves Wiccans, and then you want to further dilute this and say that you're just into modern culture, modern psychology, and that it has nothing to do with the sociology, has nothing to do with the patternization of the five-pointed inverted pentagram that acknowledges the corporeal carnal aspects to how we exist, how we move, how we become, and whether or not you want to jump into the role of and be a key player in recruitment, which is this knowledge. What they're saying, what they're coming forth with is that this knowledge is very easy to factor in, that these 5 points are out there for everyone to see, right? But then again, you look at the 6, 7. So what if we were to count that? So you have your 0, right? Then let's say 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13. So you get into the fact that when you're really counting it through a rationalistic way and you say 0 exists, you're looking at the 6, 7 and how it really expresses the point between 8 and 13. And if you combine the 8 and 13 together, you come up with 21. And in my estimation, the ontology, this is the end number when this ontology echoes back and refracts back onto itself. So the information basically feeds back into itself like a piezoelectric system, right? So when you get into the electromagnetics, the strong and weak nuclear force, all the things that we hail through this entropy-based thermodynamic system as, again, hailing to our existence, we begin to see that if you leave out the Fibonacci, if you leave out the golden mean, if you leave out the Phi or Phi formulation, then you get stuck in what Friedrich Nietzsche looked at as flat time, or like a looping time where you just see the redundancy. So the very thing that gives life meaning, which is the Fibonacci or the Phi, the golden mean standard, the conch shell, the ram's horn, right? This illusion of beauty, right? This illusion of a supremacy, the very thing that gives the spice to life. Once you deem that as the ultimate form of a lie, right? Of the fact that this is just the Fibonacci is just a fabricated notion that takes from the pi formulation. So you've got this flat time disk, in other words, that seems to really, if you look at it from another parallax view or from a certain position, a degree, if you will, you begin to see how this maybe manifests itself as a corkscrew and that you might be missing something, right? So you have this conical opening that leads into another disk or spherical shaped, right, leveling. And so this is really harkening back to Dante's Inferno. It's the whole allegory subset of looking at these doxastic layers of the ontology or the human condition, as to say that the people who acknowledge this take the brunt of this, carry the Promethean torch for this, and are celebrated as key players who acknowledge themselves as being this, are in fact the people that we celebrate throughout time and history as, say, Santa Claus, right? That harkens back to these Greco-Roman Pythagorean characters, right? Or in modern day, right, Hunter S. Thompson or Johnny Depp, these people that are carrying the torch for people of the past, and in doing so are forced into, wow, I reckon this position, I see this position, I take it up, and the ontology is telling me to actualize this into an actionable form. And there you have Johnny Depp, Marilyn Manson, outright doing the devil's bidding. Or is it the ninth gate? Is it the witch's bidding, right? Is it Mother Circe? Is it Hathor? I mean, we look at the strange implications here with Johnny Depp and the fact that he seemed to be inculcated into the occult and had a strange, very close relationship with his mother, right? So you begin to see, and same with Elon Musk, you begin to see how these witches wanted a materialization for their children and seemed to imbue a very unhealthy sort of, maybe not sort of, but this Oedipus complex, right? Where the witch actually became very close to what we see as Tiamat in the Babylonian lore, where you look at Kingu, those who would be kings, and the strange parallel there with the no kings protest, right, against Trump and all that he stands for, right? When you look at people, it doesn't matter what side you sit on, because you're just these polarized bipartisan efforts are just of dynastic rule, are really just the involvement with thermodynamics and sitting on either one side or the other, saying, look, we'll work for the side of the totality or the enthalpy of the system, and we're working as kings, right, in line of the throne, as to say that this much energy is required for the total equalization of a system before it gets into Zerot's law and breaks off into another entropy-based system. At the lower rungs, you have those who are creating chaos on a certain level. That's not to say that entropy is reducible just to chaos, but somebody's got to kick up the storm, right? Somebody's got to create this nothingness folding back into nothingness, equaling something, because what it equaled was, in presupposition, is energy and energetics, and all we're looking at is a geometric inference that through rationalization has to equal geometric unity in sacred geometry. And then you begin to look at how if you see things through the contextual way of a dead anatomical universe, you start to see the emergence of a square, right? Even a compass and a square and so forth, right, to break this down. But what you're always really looking at is these spherical elements that further the point of black spheres and quantum computing, because now you have to have a self-supporting unit of measure, and you begin to see how these energetics of nothing folding in on itself tend to fabricate another parallel reality in the way of sacred geometry. When you look at the sphere as a unitized measure, where you could say, oh, here's the triangle, here's the square, here are these other shapes and patterns made through Metatron's cube, where in fact you can't remove the sphere from the movement. And the sphere truly represents, because when you're looking at a sphere, you're actually looking at the sphere, just like it's depicted on the front of many Masonic halls, right? Where you see the circumpunct with the dot in the middle. What you're really looking at is you're looking at a sphere either moving away from you or coming toward you. But when you see it as an event from the side, you are seeing the mystic monad, the mystic almond, right? Behold the sign. And you are further looking at what could be compiled, when we actualize this and we put this into a form, is the impenetrable head of Prince Rupert's drop versus the fragile tail that causes this refraction and this destruction of the entire monadic structure, right? So you could say that these witches, these occult practitioners, these Satanists, as they would be called, right, because they're sitting juxtaposed to what we considered Christianity, which is just keeping a blind eye and saying nothing to see here, nothing to see here. I'm not running any interference for any larger team. And then you see that, yeah, you're collecting this money, you're creating more disorder, and this is everything from televangelists to the LDS Church to the Jehovah's Witnesses to the Mormon Church. Look it up sometime. You'll see $200-300 billion just on the surface with all these organizations, with their holdings, where they are implicit in owning entire land bodies and structures and being involved. When we look at the Sinclairs and the Robinsons and so forth, we look at this implicit connection with the autocratic and monarchy type systems around the world. It's like, choose your flavor. In other words, choose your quark, choose how deep you want to see where this sort of plank firewall exists. But that is based on your level of perception, chosen perception or comfort, that you don't want to go any deeper. And so you do not further want to fragment and compartmentalize. And then you look at people like Aleister Crowley and others who got into these 28-day long, really, menstrual cycles, right? And they went into the artifices of trying to go through the physiological actions of this Hathor, Circe. Do we even separate Lilith and Eve? Because I think that there's a very good indication that Eve and Lilith were the same person, and that when we look at these demonic births at the Red Sea, that it's also implicit that Cain, to the line of the Ophites, Tubal Cain, actually Cain manifested from this dark aspect of the Sophia, or the feminine, right, where she had invited the serpent in. In other words, she started to involve herself in the carnal temporal aspects of the ephemeral state of religiosity, where she could live always in this state of discord that had more assurance than this so-called benevolent or good God that seems to be a fantasy, a paracosm that people enter into, particularly when we're talking about MK Ultra, where people go into this fantasy or this illusionary imaginary tale that they invariably believe in. And we live under this mass psychosis of this fantasy world, from the CP to the ritualistic murders that are happening every day all around us all the time, right, in droves. And that we like the fresh air, that we choose not to see how the fresh air and the sun and the promise of a new day directly correlates into the systemization of these terrible ritualistic events that are happening every day around the world. And the decision, the choice comes directly to you, and it says, look, all you have to do is either choose yourself or choose the illusion of that which seems to exist outside of you, that you have no proof from this computational Konrad Zuse, right, Alan Turing, or even more Jacobo Grinberg effect, that, if you want to believe in a holographic universe, be my guest. But through this cosmology, you are just reducing the notion to a comfort level of a paracosm, in other words, if this makes sense. So then we see Disney emerge, we see Epstein Island, we see Johnny Depp owning his island, we see all of these implicit aspects that come together through these puzzle pieces, where invariably they know through these occult ritualizations that ultimately they have to be rejected by the fodder, right, and accepted by this unholy mass of practitioners that are really trying to sit at the seat of God. Yeah, this gets into the ninth circle, right? Yeah, ninth gate, ninth circle sounds a lot like the Vatican, a lot of the things that Kevin A looks like, on the Sean Atwood channel. And yeah, if you want to throw bones at that and you want to say, look, and throw bones, right? You have all these black ball, you have all these Masonic and witchcraft terms that come from Black's Law Dictionary, and in fact create the construct of law and what they consider universal law. So we come down to the fact that a universe is compiled on principle. And even more so, that the anti-principle, or the backhand side, may be where this zero, right, this left-hand path, draws in like a gravity well and ingests this information, and the illusion of this Prince Rupert's drop head to be this impenetrable, indestructible fate, right, through this convex and concave Leibniz optical lens, right, that really leads into the hieroglyphic monad, the John D hieroglyphic monad. And you look at the non-Euclidean spherical mathematics, and it begins to display itself over and over again, where you see the sphere as this countable measure of all number, all sequence, all divination, all gematria, right, manifest into the abecedary alphabet expression on into the written word. And you begin to see how an entire religion may have become structuralized from this, that we are only going to see the good. And in fact, it became a poster boy or a campaign face, right, for the truth about how things run, which is you get into it, like the Ophites. Do you have to really look that far to see? I mean, it's told to you not just in parable, but in direct storyline when you look at the line of Cable as compared to Seth, which is, Abel and Cain, right? And the slaying of Abel, and the fact that Cain offered up a sacrifice of a dead animal, a pure animal, right? And that the pure animal represented all sacrifice, all death, and that expressly put forth then was that he said, I not only killed the animals, I put forth this sacrifice of this unholy doctrine because Cain came from the Lilith that was most likely Eve, right? And that Adam was a sort of syllogistic good man, supposedly, but he chose his ignorance, did he, right? And that the skilled man, the one who would bring techne, Tubal Cain, And the offspring of the men of renown, right, and the women of renown, which are really witchcraft, right, it's witches, and sorcery and druidism. And here we are in this month right now, going through this, and we have the AI3 Atlas coming in a matter of days, 1 week in fact, on the 29th, a little over a week. We've got AI3 passing closest to the sun, and even Avi Loeb, which you could say, is he an occult practitioner? You know, you look at Albert Bender and these people who are divining and directing altars, right, and actually doing things like Diane Pasulka, Gary Nolan, Tim Taylor, but that you see these people actually doing these occult practices out in the open, right? So it's the same religion, it's the same practitionership that's followed over and over again. It's the same MO. There's nothing different in it. Like even when you look at Jacobo Grinberg right before he disappeared, the interviews that he was talking about, you know, he's talking about this cheetah, this practitioner, this witch who is helping people, healing people, right? But not necessarily not going that far with it, right? It very much is reminiscent to Chris Bledsoe talking about what his son alluded to, that he admitted to his son, which was this is not the divine Mother Mary. That's just a sort of a pseudonym. This is in fact Hathor, who has the parabola on her head. That you could very easily see. This is the inverted pentagram. So it's trapping so it's sacrificing. It's an altar of sacrifice. So sacrifice one for the many, right? And keep the many in this illusion to save them from the reality that those who call themselves gods must live under this lofty weight. And what is that lofty weight? That they live in this higher doxastic plane of existence because they take on the responsibility of murdering, sacrificing a certain number of people. But what are they really doing? They're disturbing the order intentionally. They're taking the phi or phi-based golden mean order, right, the Fibonacci, and they are replacing it with the pi-based singular flat time and Nietzschean disk, right, of reoccurring time, reoccurring space, right? That you will live in the illusion, you will live in the samsara, you will live in the Urubarus, you will be happy living in the redundancy, or you have two directions to go in. You'll either be an aspect of the sacrifice, or you will step up and sacrifice others.